Hi, this is Joe and welcome back to the shop. Have a couple of tungsten grinding tips for people who like to do TIG welding. I picked up this Harbor Freight small mini grinder, and a lot of people use this grinder for TIG welding, so this is nothing new, but I've done a couple modifications to it. First thing is I used to use a 1-inch belt sander and sitting over on my workbench and have to get up and go over and come back and sit down and get up and go over, and so I wanted something much smaller I can put right on my welding table. And the way there's a grinder for like $29, and there's another one with a slightly bigger with a like a Dremel pencil tip that's on a cable that you can use for mini grinding. Didn't want that one. I wanted the cheapest, smallest one I could get. That out of the box comes with a polishing or a buffing wheel, and it comes with a small or thin, sort of coarse grinding wheel, and I didn't like that. So what I did was I took Harbor Freight also sells a 3-inch mini grinding wheel set for the slightly larger mini grinder. So what I did was I took the wheels off, and there's a couple of spacers inside here. The discs by themselves would not fit, so I took the spacers off and ground them down a bit, about 1/4 of an inch on each spacer. Then I was able to mount the finer grinding wheel and a wheel that sort of looks like a Scotch-Brite wheel. And so I've been able to mount that up, run it. There's no rubbing. The grinder works really well with that. So that's how I modded the grinder. So I now have a Scotch wheel and a much finer grinding wheel than the one that comes with the grinder. When you're TIG welding, as most of you know, the metal, the base metal, when you get it hot and it starts melting, a lot of the impurities come off of the base metal, vaporize, and then collect on your tungsten electrode. And over time that gets sort of cruddy. And in the past on my belt sander I've tried to sand that off. What that does is it thins out the tungsten, makes it smaller, and in a lot of cases you have to grind down past the crud on the tungsten, and that wastes a lot of tungsten. So what I've done is, by putting the Scotch-Brite wheel on the grinder, I can now go in and very lightly remove that buildup of impurities on the tungsten. And I do this before I grind, because I don't want to get any of those impurities embedded into the tungsten electrode. So first off, I clean that up, and you notice I'm pointing the tungsten down. If you turn around and try to buff with the tungsten pointing up, you'll snap your tungsten off. So always face that down. And you probably can't see this very clearly, but now, after using the Scotch-Brite wheel, all those impurities are now gone, and the tungsten looks pretty clean, again, without grinding the diameter of that tungsten down. So what I do at this point, and a lot of people I've seen, I've even done this in the past, is I put the tungsten electrode in my drill and I spin it and hold it up against either the belt sander or a grinding wheel. And I found that isn't as accurate by doing it by hand. So what I do is I very gently, first off, take the tungsten and very lightly, let's say if you have some buildup of filler rod on your tungsten tip, or by dipping the tungsten, usually what I do first off is to very gently flatten that tip, remove any impurities from the tip of the electrode, And I do that by hand. And then what I do is, again, holding the tungsten like this, pointing up. I can now, and depending if I want a steeper angle or a shallower angle, I can just move my hand a little bit. And then we'll bring it into the wheel, and I lightly turn the tungsten with my hand. And if you watch closely, you'll start to see it may start to wobble. The tip where you're grinding the tungsten may start to wobble a little bit. And so all you have to do is just come in and very gently rotate the tungsten until you get the angle and the grind that you want. And then once I'm done grinding, I come back over to the Scotch-Brite wheel and I polish that freshly grounded tip on the electrode. That removes a lot of the coarse lines that the stone put in the tungsten. And by looking at that, it's very smooth now. I happen to really like, and I do a lot of very thin TIG welding, 25 to 30 thousandths. And I find that by doing this, by polishing the end of the electrode, I get a lot less arc wander at the lower amperages. So I really like polishing that tungsten. Again, it gets rid of all the crud off that tungsten. I like using the finer stone. I'm really enjoying having the luxury of having the grinder right at my welding table. I like the results of the polished tungsten electrode by using the Scotch-Brite wheel. So just a couple of tips that I've picked up by playing around grinding tungsten myself. Again, this grinder is, the mini grinder is around $28. If you use a 20% coupon, you're saving even more. And the size, the cost, I can pick up the replacement grinding wheel and Scotch-Brite wheel at Harbor Freight. So I think it's a great deal. Hope you enjoyed the video, and check back for the next video that I come up with. Thank you.